Constantly shifting through the time-space continuum, Metron's three disciples observe the universe from the Mobius Couch.
I don't want you to ever forget about us. In the front seat, listening to songs that made you think about me. Bonfire smoke on your hoodie that I stole from your flat? No, I never gave it back, but I don't want you to ever forget about the Mobius Couch. A time-space interdimensional vehicle from which your three hosts survey the world of comic books, ladies and gentlemen. Today's lyrical intro is, of course, Forget About Us, the debut solo single from Little Mix's Perry Edwards. We all know and love that song, of course. It's a Perry Edwards summer. It's a forget about us summer. I know we just mentioned Little Mix and Perry Edwards, but this is a podcast actually about comic books. And ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to talk about Marvel's 1994's 4-issue Eisner Award winning miniseries Marvels by Kurt Busiek and art by Alex Ross. That's what we're talking about today. But so, ladies and gentlemen, before we get into the meat of these issues and talk about the comic, let's introduce your hosts. I, of course, am Boston's own Alessandro. If there's one thing you know about me, it's that I live in Boston and love it, loving it in Boston. And joining me as usual are Joe.
Hey Al. I'm not in Boston.
What's up?
And I don't love it.
And joining us as usual is, of course, famous Perry Edwards denier Patrick. How's it going, Pat?
It's going great. I'm not a denier. I love her. I just, she's not coming out with strong stuff.
I've seen the YouTube videos where you deny that she exists and was ever part of Little Mix.
Oh, yeah. You didn't think we found that channel, Patty, but we found it.
Yeah, you do videos of that and how...
She has an amazing range, and I don't think she's putting music out there that really expresses her full range.
I'm just saying, Pat, you got a lot of video. You have a lot of videos about that and about how Avril Lavigne died 50 years ago and has been replaced by a club. Those are most of your YouTube.
That's true. That is true.
Yeah. All right. But so let's talk Marvels. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is, if you're listening to this in order, you will have already heard us talk about Kingdom Come.
Mm-hmm.
And for our eagle-eared listeners, you'll remember that in that Kingdom Come episode, we mentioned Marvels because that, coming off of Marvels, Alex Ross pitched Kingdom Come to DC, and that was the genesis of that whole project. Mm-hmm. And today we're doing kind of a prequel episode about Marvels. Again, This came out in 1994, won Eisner Awards. It was a big hit, a huge hit at the time.
What are we doing?
It was a giant comic.
What comic?
Marvels.
What? Why did we do that?
No reason.
Okay. But so Marvels is a big hit. Won Eisner Awards. It was also... So this came out before Astro City, and Astro City is also a famed Kurt Busiek and Alex Ross collaboration because Alex Ross did a bunch of the covers and some of the art in Astro City, which came out in, I think, Image Comics. I forgot what the imprint was of that. But Astro City is very much the whole run. All the runs are kind of the world of superheroes seen through the eyes of kind of the everyman or the street level criminal, that kind of stuff. And of course, the seeds of all that are very much planted in Marvels, which is 4 large issues covering the big historical events in Marvel's continuity through the viewpoint of Phil Sheldon, who's a news reporter, photographer. He's a
photographer.
He's a photographer / novel writer because he's writing a book about him. But a photographer who works for New York publications of repute, such as the Daily Bugle, J. Jonah Jameson, and others, probably the failing New York Times.
He does. He freelances, so he works for any of the newspapers.
Yeah. All right, but let's before we get in, let's do overall takes. Before we get into the whole issues and stuff, I'll go first. No, actually, I've gone first on all of these. Someone else go first.
I'll go first. So the first time I read Marvels was when I was a broke high school teenager, and I went to Barnes and Noble. And back in the day, you could just read graphic novels at Barnes and Noble, and no one would say anything.
They're sitting on the shelves.
Yeah, I basically sped read this entire four big issues. And at the time, I think because I just ingested media so quickly, I didn't love it. I liked the art. It was different, but I didn't really pick up on the subtle, storylines.
How
Reading it
late did you read it? Like, was this like 5 years after it came out? Was it?
It was probably, this was 1994.
Yeah, I think so.
It was probably 8 or 9 years, after it came out.
Okay.
So reading it as an adult and reading it in 2024, I identified with it way more, and I really loved it. I thought the way they introduced the superheroes, the Marvels, and people's reaction to them, how they were basically weapons of mass destruction, and the fight between Human Torch and Namor, how that was this moving atomic bomb that could hit your neighborhood whenever possible, and how it just completely changed society overnight, and everyone was wanting things to go back to normal eventually, and then there's the acceptance that things aren't going to go back to normal. And I just felt like I really identified with it more, especially after going through what we've been through over the last 4 to 5 years with COVID and all that stuff, how the world can just flip on its head. I thought Ross's art I enjoyed more in this than Kingdom Come. I think Kingdom Come, the color palette was a little bit darker, which made it in the big battle scenes kind of hard to distinguish what was happening. And I think
there's a lot of like bright, sunny battlefield.
Yeah. So there's more kind of, it's easier to tell what's going on. The way he drew the Human Torch and painted the Human Torch. There's that one panel when he makes direct eye contact with Phil Sheldon, and it's so good because you can understand why Phil Sheldon would be terrified of this thing. So I just thought it's an interesting take, having it told from the human perspective. And I thought the art worked. It worked really well. And I thought the writing was great. And I think it really conveyed how jarring it would be if superheroes did exist and supervillains existed. And you would literally always be on the verge of like the world ending, like it could happen at any moment. And then it doesn't happen because you get saved. And then you end up going back to your regular job that Monday, even though Galactus just almost ate the planet. You just go back to, it's just like life. So there was just a lot more I related to it this second read through. So I really enjoyed it.
Okay. I don't have anything to add to what Patrick said. I also loved this comic. I thought it was amazing. I haven't read this before. This was my first time reading. And I just thought it was amazing. I have read Astro City before, and there's a lot of through lines thematically and stuff in this comic and Astro City. First of all, both of you should read Astro City. I really liked it. Tarnished Angel.
Yeah, we should add that. It's on our list, right?
Yeah. But if you all do nothing else with your lives, read the Tarnished Angels story arc. Tarnished Angel singular, story arc of Astro City. It's great. But loved Marvels. To Patrick's point, Ross's art I love in this. I know we talked in Kingdom Come, in Kingdom Come he did a very kind of photorealistic, super realistic art style with harsh lighting. It was kind of not really our bag, I think, for all three of us. This one, he does a much more sort of stylized, kind of 1930s and 40s Depression era, World War II era, like Edward Hopper, Norman Rockwell, that kind of sort of more paint art style. And I think that works great here. I really like that much more. I like Mark Waid. I think I've loved Kingdom Come, as we talked about. I like Mark Waid. Kurt Busiek is a poet. I love the way he describes the everyman experience. Phil Sheldon's viewpoint really comes through. The way he interacts with these heroes, or kind of is interacted by, because again, he's an ant in a world of gods. It's just really handled well and subtly. The mutant issue and how Busiek uses mutants as a stand-in for minorities, for the communist sort of McCarthyism scare, like all of that combined is really layered and done exquisitely. The Galactus issue is a whole nother level of just, what is it like when a planet eater comes to your planet and you're a reporter. It's just next level stuff. I really wish, I know the MCU and Marvel movies have been not making much money lately, with the exception of Deadpool and Wolverine. I just want to tell Feige and all those people, like, do this as a movie. This is the kind of stuff that would be wonderful to see on screen. And this comic sold. It was popular. So I think it would have a similar effect. But I'm going to stop now because I'm just rambling. But I'm basically repeating what Patrick said. I loved all aspects of this. It's wonderful. There's no reason not to read these 4 issues. They're great.
Also, Joe, before you dive into your thing,
go ahead.
Did we say that like the premise of it is it's like a retelling of Marvel's history? So it's like an actual timeline, and I think the story starts in 1939. It goes from 1939 and ends in 1974. So like it's of that era. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, I also and on top of that, Patty, the like literally every like reference to like on a newspaper or a headline or like someone says in passing that they heard that Daredevil did blah blah blah. Like all of those are literally issues of Marvel comics. You can
they're real,
and I think that's really cool. Like literally, go ahead with your overall. It's not even like a tiny bit. It's every single one of them. I thought that was really cool. I love this story. I always have. It's not. I don't know if I like it better than Kingdom Come. I don't even know if they're really comparable. Other than that, it's Alex Ross's art.
Yeah,
but Kingdom Come is like Gods Among
Men. For the
end,
let's talk about it because I think they're sort of pretty deeply connected. But
I mean, they are, but it's like it's kind of like apples and oranges in a way. It's like comparing DC Comics to Marvel Comics, period.
Right? But they are. But interesting. Well, let's get to it at the end. But I think we can have a good discussion about how they're similar.
The funny thing about the art is that I kind of like Kingdom Come more. I think he's refined it a little bit more. He's a little better at it. It's still photorealistic in this. I feel like but like the thing that I don't love about this version of his this style of his art is that I feel like he's like he tried a little too hard to make the costumes realistic, kind of like how we were joking about that one version of the Flash that he's drew outside.
They look like a real dude in a Party City costume, like a real
and I think a little bit there's a little too much of that in this. Not a lot. I mean, it's not there all the way. It's not as bad as that Flash drawing, let's put it that way. But like Spider-Man looks a little tiny bit still, like there's a little too many wrinkles in his clothes, and like I don't know, it's just little things like that. And I'm like, I wish it was just a little more like Kingdom Come, where it's a little more straight tights and like a little more fantastical with the costumes. Just the tiniest bit that would make it like kind of fall on that edge of the fence for me. But that being said, like Patty said, the Human Torch is illustrated wonderfully. It looks amazing. Like he did all these kind of studies with actual fire to get that right and stuff like that. But Alex Ross's art's fantastic. That being said, and I don't think a better artist could have been picked to convey this type of story the way that it's being told. So that was probably one of the best decisions they made when they made this book. That was that he would be the one to paint it. But Busiek's story, I've never identified with it more now that I'm an old man and have a wife and 2 children and live in the suburbs. So like this is like this like completely changed how I read this book this time around. And I was just like, wow, I've always loved this book for what it is, but now I truly love this book. Like I identify with Phil so much more now that I've like emulated. I've lived long enough to emulate it, kind of his lifespan, sort of. Not that old, but you know what I mean. So like that kind of changed it for me, and it made me love it even more. Yeah, that's my overall take. Yeah, I really loved it. It's one of my favorite Marvel books, but I've had quite a few decades to read it. So
it is. I mean, I'm on
having discussions with our friends and our nerd friend, or at school or whatever, and just being like, why don't they write a comic where like you look up and you see Batman jump overhead or something like that, and how amazing that would be. Like, what if you actually experienced that? And then they like made this book, and I'm not saying like are dumb, but I feel like a lot of comic book readers have that thought and those conversations with their friends, and this just nails that so well, especially through the eyes of a working adult, but still, like he has an excuse to be in the middle of it all, I guess is what I'm saying with his job. But Gotham Central really did a good job about that. Like they would just show.
Gotham Central is also a great.
And then Batman and Robin would just jump overhead and just be like off doing something. And they'd be like, "Oh shit, there they go," like kind of thing. And like it's that kind of idea. But this just crushes that out because you get to see his whole life and through actual cosmic level events and street level events that happen within the actual Marvel universe. And I thought it was really well done.
So let's get into the issues, but before we get into the specifics, just overall, like Patrick was saying, these 4 issues pretty much trace the bulk of history of Marvel Comics, starting with
it's like people's first
Human Torch and
Namor,
eras, who were kind of the earliest Marvel heroes. Then we get an issue dealing with the X-Men and mutants and what effect that has on daily life. We get a Galactus appearance, that kind of like in the 60s, 70s, when that Silver Age sort of kind of galactic scale of events. And then we end with Gwen Stacy's death in the, I think, mid-70s, like Patrick, I think it was 74, you mentioned, Patrick, right, when that event happens. And the kind of, we're going to get into how that connects to Kingdom Come, but that's kind of the beginning of the sort of the darkening and grittifying of comics. Like Gwen Stacy's death is a turning point in sort of comics history. But those are the main events that these issues cover, along with, they reference other kind of smaller ones. But let's start with issue 1, which, as we mentioned, really centers around, I mean, a lot happens in issue 1, but it really centers
like
around
Namor
the Human Torch
and
but
it's
Namor.
Also Cap.
Yeah.
It's also
and those were
World War
the
II
3, right. And those were kind of the 3 main, going back to Timely Comics, which was the imprint before Marvel became Marvel later in the 50s. And those were kind of like the 3 big hitters of the golden age of comics in the kind of late 30s, early 40s. That was the golden age. So we have the Human Torch, who's fat. That is a real fascinating story. And Namor. And both of these characters throughout Marvel's history are pretty well linked, as we're going to talk about in a minute. But so Human Torch and Namor both debuted in Marvel Comics #1, which was Timely Comics, Marvel Comics #1. And Marvel Mystery Comics issues 8 and 9 was the very first comic crossover, which featured the battle between Human Torch and Namor, which we see in Marvels. That was a big, like, keystone event in comic history, where these 2 fire and water battling, like these big Marvel Comics properties fighting. And that's kind of the main, not theme, but sort of the main events that we're going through in issue 1, but told through the viewpoint of Phil Sheldon, this at this point young photographer. He's going to get older in a minute.
He's young. By young, he's like 33. I don't know. He doesn't.
I don't know. This was the 30s. He was probably 14. I don't know. He's probably super
He's probably
young.
20 or something. He's old enough to go overseas.
I would say they're in their early 20s, because it starts off with like him and J. Jonah Jameson, and they all look like they would be like right out of high school, like college age.
I don't know.
But we get to see the origin. So
like they're
the
wearing
origin of the
suits
Human
and smoking
Torch.
like they've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, but we get to see. So the origin of the human. Everything about the Human Torch is bonkers. Like, we should write books about this. It's fucking bonkers, Gary.
I mean, Human Torch is insane.
But the origin of this comic, again, he debuted in 1939. The origin of this guy is he's an android robot built by a dude in a glass tube, and as a mistake of destiny, when he lets air into it, he catches fire, and he learns to harness fire and become the Human Torch. Like, that's the origin of that story.
Well, he also, I guess, since he's synthetic and an android or whatever, he doesn't burn, obviously. But like, it's not like he's in pain, is what I'm saying. But he does learn to control it eventually.
This is a
which
logic
is a little
that
silly
only,
and comic booky, but
only 30s comics could parse through. But the logic is, even though he's a robot android, he apparently is completely anatomically correct and needs to eat and sleep and shit to survive.
Yeah, well, that's
is like part of canon. Even though he's an android, he's actually a human, although he's an android. But only the 30s, like, would this make sense? But it's wild.
Can we talk about? I just real quick before we dive in, because I know this is gonna get overlooked. But this initial page where you meet Phil and J. Jonah, like, Phil goes on this roller coaster ride of how he feels or should feel or thinks he should feel about what's going on with him and the superheroes and living in the world that now has superheroes in it. And J. Jonah kind of represents the other flip side of that coin. And he just goes like, crazy by the end, he's crazy J. Jonah and like yelling about how Spider-Man's a criminal and a murderer and all that kind of shit. So it's very normal J. Jonah arc to get him there. But even in this beginning, like, I think it's kind of interesting that it's like there are times when Phil kind of like dips his toes into those waters, so to speak, but then he kind of goes back out again. And it's really interesting to see their distinctly different trajectories as the story continues onward. Even though J. Jonah, we only really interact with him periodically, but like you see him enough to be like, oh, he's gone even crazier than the last time Phil talked to him or whatever.
Well, but and as an art note, look at J. Jonah's eyes.
He's intense, dude.
Oh yeah,
he's an insane man. He's an insane man.
He's intense. In that panel. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say before we really started getting into the superhero of it all.
But the other thing I want to get into that's interesting is both. Well, Namor more so, because we'll get into kind of the history of Namor a little bit more so, but both Human Torch and Namor begin as monsters, right? They're not Supermen or Batmen they're not these kind of
in issue
perfect
0
heroes. Both begin kind of as
Did you read issue 0? Issue 0 is really just issue 1, but a little expanded version of him creating the Human Torch and then literally burying him in cement because they.
Oh, then I did I did read that.
Yes,
that was like 10 pages. It wasn't a full.
Yeah, it's very small. It's just supplementary material, and really, it's really superfluous. Honestly, you don't need it in terms of the story because, of course, they didn't want you to like need something else to finish the story, but.
Yes, about PTH.
It's pretty pictures from Alex Ross, but it's also really just about like the Human Torch being buried and becoming a monster kind of thing. But that's why I was like asking if you read that in the middle of that sentence. Sorry, I'll go ahead.
No, but it's about PTH, Phineas Thomas Horton. He goes by PTH, creating the Human Torch.
PTH,
but just that point that both these heroes basically start at, Human Torch's original origin is he's Frankenstein's monster. He is a synthetic being who's scary and out of control and dangerous, and then he becomes a hero. Namor isn't really a Frankenstein's monster, but he's just basically an enemy of the U.S. when he's first introduced. He is a menace to law and order. But this goes back to that kind of golden age 30s sensibility. Both of you read Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, right?
Yeah.
But that, which is Michael Chabon's novel about kind of 30s and 40s Jewish comic creators as a, it's a novel, but loosely based on real.
You haven't read it.
I've never read it.
Oh, you should read it. But their really hero, if you remember, Joe, like their hero, the escapist, has a very tragic past, and he's not a Superman out there just as a god saving the world.
No, it's more of like a Houdini.
Yeah, he has a tragic past. He's kind of a Houdini character, but that plays into. I just brought that up because Chabon really based on that, on these 30s kind of heroes, but sort of heroes. They all have
it's really
difficult pasts. They're misunderstood. They're outcasts. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they part of society? Are they not? Which kind of goes into that sort of Jewish sensibility, in the U.S. of that time. That because a lot of comic writers were Jewish. Both the Superman creators.
Schuster and
Siegel.
Siegel,
So a lot of these early comic creators were from, Jewish, from that background. And they kind of brought in that sort of persecuted, misunderstood minority sensibility into their heroes and into the origin. And we kind of get that with both the Torch and Namor, because again, they're not Batman who are just, I'm out for revenge and I'm the knight and I will fight against evil. These are all flawed creatures who are misunderstood and seen as monsters, but like want to help and over time become more heroic. It's really interesting, but
Namor kind of goes on a roller coaster ride too. It's like
Namor is
he's a hero,
always
villain. It's all over the place with him.
But Busiek and Ross just really capture that in this issue. And we get a lot of it because the Human Torch starts. I know I've said this billions of times, but like as a Frankenstein monster, when Phil first encounters the Human Torch, he just exhumed himself from the ground and is on fire and just wandering the streets and is scary and dangerous. Phil first.
Well, the first time he encounters him is at like the science fair when the professor unveils him. He's in a giant whatever it is, press
conference,
World's Fair. I don't know. But he's in a giant test tube and he catches on fire, and the crowd thinks that it's a gimmick, and they're all laughing. And it is, to Al's point, it is kind of like a horror movie because Phil is a photographer, so he is taking photos, and he's the only one really looking at the Human Torch.
Who's like focused in on him,
and he notices, like he says, I was the only one looking directly at the thing when it moved, and it's a close up of the torch's like finger like moving. And the art, again, Ross's art, like this thing, these 3 panels are terrifying to me. It is very much a horror movie. Like he's trying to get out of the glass and he's on fire, and the close-up of his face, his eyes are just like bright yellow flames. And when he says it looks straight at me, like I kind of got goosebumps because it is very terrifying, and they do a really good job of instilling that in you as a normal human to see something supernatural like that right in front of you. That's your first instinct is terror. Like,
but also from the Human Torch's perspective, I'm reading from the comic. I cannot recall it perfectly, but in my first moment of conscious, something unpredicted occurred. And his first moment of consciousness is him catching on
fire. Yeah.
Like that's even from his perspective terrifying.
Well, it's like the scientist guy turned him on basically, and that happened, So
it's done so well. And again, I know I've mentioned before, but Busiek's writing.
What do you think Clark and Lois think about it? They're right there.
They show up a few times. Clark and Lois.
Right there.
Clark doesn't seem to be all that worried about it, but Lois looks pretty shocked.
But I don't know if you read about this, but actually, another side note, Phil Sheldon shows up in Kingdom Come. He's drawn in Kingdom Come in several issues.
Norm's there too.
He's in the UN as a photographer at the UN.
But I mean, Norman was modeled after his dad, so I think he just put his dad in Marvels. Like, I don't think it's supposed to be Norman McKay, but like, it's his dad, so it's Norman McKay and art wise.
But right,
I think it's really close to the end. I think it's like issue 4. But also Billy Batson's there with the street corner newspaper kid act going on.
Oh yeah, that is kind of Billy Batson.
He's like, walk street, read all about it. Human Torch almost killed someone. I'm a little boy.
The fireman.
The fireman. Anyway, the Human Torch. So it's funny because like Phil already, like they've already moved past it. It already cuts to the scene where it feels like, I think they buried him or something like that. Like, like that's what happens in issue 0. Everyone freaks out. They bury him. He like, eventually there's some sort of like crack in the cement or something, and he gets oxygen down there and he bursts into flame and escapes or whatever. And that's what this next scene is of him on the street.
Well, that was one, before I get it, like one of the more interesting things. And again, like as adults, the difference between reading as a teenager and as an adult and seeing things like this happen in real life with the Human Torch and Namor, most people wanted to move past it. They wanted to pretend like it didn't really happen, was probably a hoax. This isn't going to affect me. This isn't real. Conspiracy theory.
We talked about the Human Torch a lot in this issue.
What do you think about Phil's prospective love interest, Doris? What do you think about them gams?
She's fine.
She's wearing her wartime uniform. She's got childbearing hips. She's a 30s gal.
She is literally unfazed, like through the entire story. Outside of when Phil kind of breaks up with her, you see her upset, but otherwise, like Galactus attacks.
No, she's pretty. Like there's those middle chunks.
She handles Marvel's better than Phil
his family. For the most part.
She handles it better than Phil does. She's a very balanced. I think she must have read Seneca or something. She's a very stoic.
She is.
Takes it as it comes and handles it well. Person.
We'll get to it, but she catches her kids they think they have a fucking dog in the basement. It turns out to be a mutant girl, and Doris is just like,
they think the kids are taking care of a stray dog.
Phil, don't freak out, but our kids have been sneaking scraps to a little girl who's also a mutant in the basement for the last 2 weeks.
Oh man.
Anyways, when are we moving to Florida, Phil? I want to go to Florida.
I think you know what, that's funny? She's unfazed by the superhero shit. Well, not at first. She's like, holy shit, do you see the naked guy down at the pier? Like she does, like she runs in and tells him all about it. But like, it's also one of those things where after that, the initial issue really takes the I don't know, 2, 3, and 4 kind of take place within the same like kind of realm of time, I would say, like not too crazy, like, but issue 1 is like really of its own time in World War II kind of era stuff.
Yeah,
you kind of skip forward to like when Cap comes back out of the ice, you know, kind of thing. But I guess what I'm saying is she seems rather unperturbed about the superhero shit that's going on throughout the rest of the issues, and she's really just more concerned about how shitty Phil is as a husband and father.
Well, he's a terrible.
She doesn't really care about the fact that Galactus shows up. It's really just about how Phil should spend.
Well, I think it's just different coping mechanisms. You know, Phil, throughout all these issues, Phil is just really concerned with trying to reconcile and he dubs these superhumans marvels. Like even in issue 1, we already know that he refers to Human Torch, the Submariner, and all of these people as marvels. And he's very concerned with reconciling what do these people mean? What are they to me? How do I fit into this world? On down the line. And Doris has a much more accepting outlook of they're up there in their atmosphere, and I'm down here. I just need to make my life work. Yeah. Regardless of whether the Human Torch is flying into the Empire State Building or not. I'm just living my life. And you know, I think they're just two different viewpoints of trying to deal with that.
You're right. She is way more grounded and just kind of, you know, this is what life is, and I can't do anything about the fact that there are superhumans battling in the sky above me, and I just have to kind of live my life, which Phil eventually gets there, but she's already there from issue 1.
Yeah, and I think even back to Joe's example of when the daughters were harboring a mutant girl in the basement. You know, I think, again, it just shows, because when Phil finds out, again, he jumps to, oh, my God, what does this mean? A mutant girl? What are we doing?
Contagious?
What does this mean for us? What's happening? And Doris's viewpoint is more, well, first of all, it's a little girl, and let's stop there. Like that's,
I mean,
she very much takes that viewpoint of just what can I relate to, and what is my life, what directly affects my life or not, and I'm going to live in that lane. And I think that's a real kind of dichotomy between how she and Phil view the world, because Phil is, you know, he's up there trying to see how he fits into Galactus's plan, and Doris is more like, you know, I don't fit into Galactus's plan. I'm living in the, you know, I'm
either going to die when he eats the planet, or they're going to save me, and one way or the other, I have daughters to worry about.
And she's okay with it.
Again, it's a very stoic philosophy of whether it's fortune or misfortune, you have to have a balanced, rational
It's funny we keep bringing up the Galactus
both.
thing, but I feel like that's one of the last times she gives a fuck. It's like when Mr. Fantastic or Reed Richards or whatever, like, talks to everybody inside of their brains or whatever, and she's like, holy shit, what the fuck was that? Like, it was like the last time she's like, she reacts like that a lot in the first issue, but like after that she's like, all right, well, you know, whatever. But like, man, we've talked a lot about Doris.
Yeah, more than I thought we would, but she had an effect on all of us, apparently.
Anyway, that's the last time she really has an impact on like what's going on outside of her relationship and marriage and family.
In issue 1, my favorite panel, and this again kind of just goes to the art and the writing, it's when Namor and the Human Torch are fighting, and it's that page where Namor's got the big like steel beam and the Human Torch is flying down at him. And the line is, it was as if the gods of legend have returned to Earth, at least if you read about it in the papers, that is. And then he says, it must have seemed like a glorious aerial ballet, dangerous, beautiful, and thrilling. And maybe it was, but not for us. And it really, they look like they could be from like the Greek god pantheon, you know, like Human Torch could 100% be Apollo, and Namor could 100% be Hermes or Poseidon or whatever. Like, this is the first time these people have seen supernatural godlike beings like this, and how that, I don't know, for some reason the writing and the art in that panel really hammered it home for me how insignificant you would feel if you went outside and that was happening over your city.
One art note I want to make, because this page, so on my edition, it's page 34. And I think this is pretty much synecdoche for Alex Ross's style.
Oh yeah.
This diner shot is literally Nighthawks, which is an Edward Hopper painting from the 30s, I think.
Right.
And he pretty much exactly recreates it with these reporters who are having kind of a late night diner meal together. But I think it really encapsulates Alex Ross's
and they're sitting right next to Human Torch and don't know it.
Yeah. Well, and they have no idea, right? Until he catches fire and leaves. But I just mean that I think that really represents the art style that Alex Ross is going for, which is this 30s, 40s era Hopper Rockwell kind of middle America, that sort of experience. So I just wanted to call that out because I thought it's a good little quick panel.
There's apparently not Superman jumping over a building as well.
Yeah, I don't know who that was.
It's not Superman, but I think it's representative of just this idea that vigilantes and superheroes are becoming more common.
And if you Google him, he does look exactly like that, like with the red and the straps. But I think he was meant to be like a ripoff of Superman. So it's basically,
Well, they were all those imprints were borrowing off each other at the time. Actually, so Namor, a quick side note, Namor was created as a direct response to Human Torch because, again, at Timely Comics, all those writers and creators knew each other. And
they're
when the creator of
across
Namor,
the newsroom with each other, drawing other.
When he saw the Human
the guy
Torch,
drawing Fantastic Four is sitting down the row from the guy drawing Spider-Man.
Well, they were all Stan Lee. Those were all Stan Lee. He invented and drew all of them.
I think all of them.
All those?
They're all Stan Lee.
Stan Lee can't draw. Everyone knows
but in the 30s, before Stan Lee. But so Human Torch came first, and then because Human Torch was fire, the Namor creator thought, well, why don't I make a water guy? And he based the whole idea on the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. I don't know if you know that old.
I did not know that, and I don't know what that is.
I don't know that.
Who wrote that? Well, I got a Wikipedia because I forgot who wrote Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. Was that Coleridge? Samuel Taylor Coleridge?
Samuel Taylor Coleridge.
Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. Poem by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. I got it. I won't read it because it's a super long poem. But anyway. Off of that is how I came up with Submariner and the idea of Namor and all that. So
that's really interesting, actually.
Yeah. Okay. And then we already talked about how the first crossover was the Battle of Human Torch and Namor, which we see. Actually, they fight each other twice in issue 1 because Namor has this.
I love how in between that they're in the war fighting together. Though.
It's always that.
Well, they finished their first fight, and then they go.
Yeah.
Then they go fight World War II, but then they also fight again for weird reasons.
Because I think everything is canon and it's all based on stuff. So Namor must have got pissed off about something the humans were doing to the ocean after World War II.
Namor gets pissed off all the time. It's all Namor
does. Yeah, he's always upset.
Is he ever not mad?
No.
What's
that's
Namor
like his
look
whole
like?
thing.
At any rate, the second fight happens, and Namor tries to flood the city basically, and Human Torch is. Like this stops now kind of thing. And then they have a fight, but Phil gets way too close and gets bashed in the head with a brick and loses his eye. And then after that, he marries Doris.
And he has an eye patch. Right. So, we should mention, so he and Doris were dating earlier. And then after the advent of Human Torch and Namor and the Marvels, Phil calls off the marriage because, again, basically, earlier we talked about his.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. Yeah.
Well, earlier we talked about how he had this trouble reconciling his place in the world with superheroes, and his answer at the time was kind of, "We can't start a family. The world is what is
like how? Yeah, because they had been talking about getting married, and then he's like, "What? How can I protect a family or you just as a wife, or let alone children? Like if I don't know if our house is going to explode tomorrow."
Right. And so he felt impotent because of just toxic masculinity is what
I love it, and I love how the only reason that changed is because he reconciles with the fact that it's never going to go back to normal. It's not that it's not that he's like grown somehow. it's that he's like, oh well, I guess this is life now, so fuck it, and like starts. And I'm like, he grows by the end of the 4 issues. Don't get me wrong, but like I just feel like in this moment he's just like, that's not the takeaway you're supposed to have there.
Yeah, we also in issue 1 get introduced to Captain America fighting them Nazis over in Europe.
Just a little bit though. It's really Cap's more of an issue 2 thing.
Well, we see him through
little
headlines
highlights of
and magazines and newspapers that we were shown here.
Well, the big thing is like the branding of Captain America, because everyone instantaneously loves him. I mean, granted, the Human Torch is Frankenstein's monster, and then Namor is attacking the city when they first meet him. So neither of them is classical superhero, but people could identify with Captain America because he looks like them, and he's in a red, white, and blue suit, and he's fighting Nazis, and so he was the first Marvel that people like rooted for and were not fearful of. So he was
and then first. I think that because Human Torch and Namor was fighting with him, they kind of like rode his coattails a little bit.
Yep. All right. Should we get to issue 2? Issue 2 is great. I really like
issue 2 is fantastic. Yeah.
Issue 2 takes place.
Might be my favorite issue, I think.
Yeah, and that takes place, I think, in the
the end of this. Then issue 1 is just he finally gets to go over to World War II and then like witness Cap.
Oh right, he does go to he goes to the European front and actually sees. What was that team name? Was it the Invaders, the Cap,
the Defenders?
Defenders? Was that?
I honestly don't know who most of those people are that are parachuting down.
There are a lot of Timely Comics people.
Yeah, it's all Timely because at the time this was Timely Comics.
Like, is that Ghost Rider?
No, it's someone else. Yeah,
they're all, other than one of them being randomly called Black Widow, but it's not remotely related to anything that comes later as Black Widow. I think is the only connection to almost any of those.
One note I want to make. So look at this. This is what we're talking about, like them parachuting in this panel. For those of you listening, you don't get to see it, but it's last page of the first issue. Couple notes I want to make. One, Captain America is holding Bucky as if he were a marionette, and Bucky is actively firing a machine gun.
Firing a machine gun.
Like he's holding him as if he's a little marionette boy, just in the crook of his arm.
He's holding him under his arm.
Firing a machine gun is going. Second note I want to make is that we get to see the Human Torch's teenage sidekick Toro, who is also a human.
Yeah,
he is
only
exactly
briefly
a
see
Human
him.
Torch.
That's the only time you see him. Yeah,
but a teenage version of the Human Torch.
Where did Toro ever come? So what's Toro's origin? Did he just go back to the scientist guy and go like, "Hey, make me a son"? Like, where did they come
No, Toro's a human. Toro's a human whose parents were nuclear. Yes, his origin.
Oh,
Toro. Yeah, this is his origin. Is his parents were nuclear scientists. And because of those tests, he was nuclear infused and gained the ability to be a Human Torch as a teenage child. And so then he got to be the Human Torch's teenage sidekick because that was in the early 40s. You gave your hero a teenage sidekick. You just did that.
If you resembled the hero, then
you get to be the sidekick.
Yeah, you're the sidekick.
And so the Human Torch got a teenage Human Torch sidekick. That's exactly Human Torch.
It broke my brain when we read Winter Soldier because he's in that, and I had no idea that there were actually 3 Human Torches. I just knew of the original android and then Johnny Storm.
I mean, it's not like I've read some original Human Torch Toro comics or anything like that, but I was aware of them fighting with Namor and Cap, like in World War II, like as the Invaders or whatever. But like, or the Defenders, the Invaders. I don't remember. It's the Invaders.
It was Invaders, right? Yeah, I think that team was the Invaders.
But that it was just one of those things where I was just like, I mean, I was aware of it, but like, obviously, Human Torch to us is just Johnny Storm from Fantastic Four. You know what I mean? Like that's the Human Torch we all grew up with and know. You know. When I found out there was another one, I was like, what? Oh, he came before Johnny Storm? Wait, there was 2 of them? You know, like it's very confusing. But
yeah. And he comes in another podcast we've done. First of all, if you haven't heard our Avengers Forever podcast, it's up on iTunes and Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all
YouTube.
But in Avengers Forever, we talked about how the Human Torch's android was kind of retconned as being the Vision android.
Don't they use the body of the Human Torch to make
Vision? They use the body of the Human Torch android to make Vision, in that weirdness. But one quick note, but as we get into 2 and the 60s, another way in which the Submariner Namor and the Human Torch are connected in the Silver Age of fully Marvel comics is, as we talked about, Human Torch Johnny Storm. You know, he was rebooted as Johnny Storm of the Fantastic Four. And Namor's Silver Age debut was, anybody guess? Fantastic Four issue 4. So he also came in during the Fantastic Four as a foil to the FF and Human Torch. So they're always connected throughout publication history. Yeah. But all right.
Issue 2.
Issue 2.
Possibly my favorite issue.
Issue 2 was wonderful.
So that's what I was saying earlier. You kind of jump forward a good 15 years here at least.
It's in the early 60s. It's definitely the early 60s.
So maybe
after the X-Men have debuted.
Yeah.
And the U.S. is gripped in a mutant panic. What are mutants? Are they human or not? How do we treat them? Are they less than us? What are they? I think the thematic content is pretty on the nose of like racism, McCarthyism, all of others, all of that.
The other context of this issue being that like Cap's back and it's like kind of the birth of the rest of the heroes. It's like Iron Man's there and Thor's there and the Hulk.
Well, this is the birth of the Silver Age. This is the birth of the Silver Age of comics with the Avengers and X-Men and all of that, right? We see it happening in real time.
Giant Man. The classic Giant Man shot.
Oh, we get a real upskirt shot of Giant Man. Look at that crotch shot right there. We just get to see.
That's actually really cool, though.
It is.
I mean, again, it's just that like capturing that idea of being a normal human being while all this shit is happening. They do it so well. Like it's done so well.
Well, I also
that's one of those moments where you're just like, that's so perfect.
And again, I know for those of you listening, you can't see it, but art note. There's this panel here. You can see Phil is giddy seeing Ant-Man, right?
Oh, yeah.
Or Giant Man. And I think that's really indicative. I think he's
more giddy over the picture he just got.
I don't know, but I think it's
because his career and like what's going on with his job is a huge piece of this story arc.
Right, but
what's going on with his ability to.
So that's true. I mean, he does actually say like, "I'm lucky to get that shot." I mean, it is about the shot, but I do think it also represents two things. One is the idea that he's just grown more comfortable with the idea that superheroes are around because it's become more common.
Yeah,
and it also represents Silver Age Marvel heroes were more heroic. They were the Avengers and the Fantastic Four. And they were more actively beautiful, wonderful. Yeah. They weren't anti-heroes like Namor and the Torch were in the 30s. These were just straight up, when someone attacks New York, the Avengers avenge and protect us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and so I think all of that's represented in this issue.
And the Fantastic Four and
Silver Age gilded look at Marvel. I think
Hulk might be like the closest thing to like a monster, quote unquote. Like in this era.
Yeah. Well, it proceeds to, they're all kind of enamored with the superheroes at this point, and as we progress in the story, we see how public opinion kind of shifts on them. But one of my favorite panels in the second issue is kind of a montage of the different Avengers saving people, and the writing is, it was life or death, it was a grand opera, it was the greatest show on earth, and every single one of us, we had the best seat in the house. So I think that kind of like really sets the tone for this issue, how everyone is obsessed now. Like these are the celebrities. These are
like the Wasp has clothing line in the window of the one store, stuff like that.
Reed
and Susan's relationship is like everyone's talking about it. The wedding is as if it was a royal wedding.
Oh yeah, it's like a royal. Yeah, it's like two celebrities getting married or something like that.
With the exception, and I want to talk about my favorite panel in this issue, absolutely. And the exception, of course, to this celebrity culture is the mutants of the X-Men.
Oh, yes.
And I want to talk about how Alex Ross draws Cyclops' visor is chef's kiss.
So the X-Men
so the panel, for those of you listening,
save a guy falling from a construction site, essentially. And because of the fact that they're mutants, basically, that's really it. Like, it looks like they're trying to attack him, but really they're trying to slow his fall and save him. So a group of people chase them down and like pin them in an alley. So it's dark, and the only light is the light of Cyclops' visor. And like the like the panel where we've discussed many times, where Cyclops blasts all the trees down and says, "Get off my lawn," to the Sentinel. Like this is like frozen in my brain of all time. Like as one of the best Cyclops panels like ever drawn in my life. Like just it's so good.
Well,
it's my favorite Ross.
To those of you listening, so you see basically his visor is a straight kind of laser line, and the rest of the panel is red lit, ambiance lit from his visor. It looks incredible.
Well, Cyclops looks incredible, but then also, again, you're seeing it from the POV of regular humans. They've chased the X-Men into this alley, and it's just Cyclops's visor glowing. Angel is above him, and Angel's eyes are kind of lit red because of Cyclops's visor.
Reflecting
the red, Angel looks terrifying, and then Bobby Iceman. This was back when he was a snowman,
clumpy snowman.
But in this image, there was something about this that reminded me of like something out of a Ridley Scott Prometheus alien type movie where he looks
got a
so alien
vibe going on.
Yeah, he has no facial features, and he's got this weird mist. His breath is obviously cold, so he's got the breath coming out that looks kind of like a tongue, like a venom tongue. Like Bobby's legitimately terrifying there, and so they do a good job of letting you understand why Phil would kind of give into that mob mentality.
Yeah, this is Phil's low point. Is also the point of the the book. I mean, not in terms of his family, but in terms of a personal low.
So let's talk about the mutants for a second, because one line that Phil really focuses on is, so this mob of what we were just describing attacks Bobby. They throw a bottle or a brick at Bobby's head.
Phil throws it.
He throws a brick at Bobby, and Bobby gets kind of pissed. Iceman Bobby gets kind of pissed off, and Cyclops says, "Iceman, don't forget about it. They're not worth it." And that line really sticks with Phil, that they're not worth it. This idea. And Phil really harps on this idea that mutants are an evolution, they're a replacement for humanity, and that humans are not worth it to mutants. And that really, going back to, again, issue 1, remember when we talked about Phil calling off his engagement, was because of that insecurity that these Marvels triggered in him, right? This insecure feeling that he can't protect his family against Marvels, he's less of a man. And the mutants in this issue re-trigger that feeling of, Phil isn't even worth it to them. He's lesser than them. He's prior evolution. He's a chimpanzee, and they're Homo
I think they do.
To take his
Busiek
place.
does a fantastic job of like building up that like tension, the underlying tension of like what everyone is going through. And this isn't even to the point where it's like going to break open. This is just a random incident.
But the other thing,
they get real rapey with Marvel Girl real fast.
They're,
I guess, grabbing at her, and then they're like, she's like, "Don't touch me," and she's like, and then one of them says, "Like, what's the matter, girly? Real humans not good enough for you." What are your intentions, dude?
It's gross.
Yeah, real gross.
I did think this was, because this question comes up all the time online about why it makes no sense in Marvel, why the public loves Fantastic Four and the Avengers but hates the mutants. And I think the reasoning they give in this book makes complete sense, because the Fantastic Four started off as normal humans, and then an accident happened, and they got powers. So like that could happen to any human. That could happen to Phil. He could have an accident and become superhero.
But to be born different,
and then to also visualize them as a different species that is replacing you and your family, that's where the fear comes from, and that's why mutants are hated versus the Avengers. And
I read it a little differently. I actually read it that the difference between the Avengers and Giant Man and all of them and the mutants is completely arbitrary. I read it more as, just like you deciding that Jewish people or black people don't get to drink from your fountain is a completely arbitrary, not based on genetic fact decision. That you choose mutants as the heroes you don't worship and that they're the monsters is completely arbitrary. And that nothing really separates Cyclops
in the
from
grand
Johnny
scheme
Storm.
of things it is, but I don't think that's not, I think it's more of what Patty was saying, like in the story.
It is.
I don't know. I read it differently.
I think in the grand scheme of things,
exactly
you're
the
right.
same. They're completely the same. They're two sides of the same coin. And one is heroes that we just decided you get to be our shining armor knights. And the others are heroes that we decide are social pariahs. It's completely arbitrary. And
what is
I love
100%?
how one. I love how when he throws the brick, he immediately is like, "What did I just do?" Like he's like standing afterwards, like holding it, going like, "What the fuck? Why did I let that change me? Like what's different about this?"
We know that Phil's a beta loser.
Mob mentality.
Don't feel that way.
Mob mentality. And we do get to see
he immediately regrets it, but I love that the line from Cyclops like haunts him, you know, like, and it really like fucks with his head, you know, a little bit.
Well, I love visually, just to Alex Ross, there's a scene where Phil in his dark room is editing photo, and it's red because, you know, dark room is red lighting to not mess with exposure. And he's doing pictures of Cyclops. I just thought that was very evocative of the idea that, you know, earlier this red lit scene was scary and monstrous, and now Phil has actively locked himself in a red lit dark room to work on his photographs. I just thought it was like a very evocative scene by Ross to do that. I thought it was really, really cool. And we also get introduced, we mentioned this before, but Phil's daughters are kind of Anne Frank style harboring a little mutant girl,
which we don't know yet, but like they're
right. But from racists, because you know, mutants are kind of stand in for minorities and persecuted groups and all that.
Well, and it's also interesting when Phil comes home, because in this issue so far he's been very, you know, loving the Marvels, and then he has this encounter with the X-Men with the mutants that he considers terrifying, and then he comes home and his two daughters are pretending that they are different superheroes, and his tone kind of changes and says, I don't think our kids should be worshiping the Marvels like this, and it's definitely because of the mutants. He doesn't want his kids
like, it's 100% racism against mutants. Yeah. And throughout, what I love about this issue too, is we keep getting this contrast of, we get to, is it Reed and Sue's wedding or Tony Stark's?
Yes. Yeah.
It's Reed and Sue's wedding.
It's Reed and Sue's wedding, but there's also like a brief art gala from like the blind girl that.
Right. But I just like how Busiek and Ross keep contrasting this glamorous Marvel lifestyle with the mutant persecution angle,
and they're there, by the way. I love
page by page this contrast of like dark suburban street and people with pitchforks chasing mutants, and then the next page,
he literally leaves the art event and goes out to the street, and there's like a sign that says like "Muties die," you know, mutants die bloody.
And the next panel is an art gala of Avengers and Reed and Sue being married and the glamour and I just like how he keeps contrasting the celebrity of some of these Marvels with the persecution of the mutant Marvels. This issue's really well done.
I mean, it's very haunting at the very end. Not to skip all the way forward, but we have the tragic ending with the mutants, and then on the TV, it's Sunday, a clash of titans, a battle of behemoths. Iron Man takes
Iron Man.
It's like he's a UFC fight. Like Iron Man is this glamorized UFC fighter, and they're paying money to go watch him fight, and he's a celebrity, while this little mutant girl is out in the, you know, world by herself, and they don't know where she's at now. It's like the juxtaposition of those two hit the hardest for me, I think, towards the end of the issue.
Yeah, well, there's one page towards the end, which is Phil walking through New York City. And it shows, like, the top panel is someone hawking Reed and Sue Forever and I Love the Fantastic Four t-shirts. And then two panels down are Daily Globe issues about the Mutant Menace.
Oh, Daily Globe, not Daily
And the
Globe.
mutants are coming for us. And it's just, again, that same contrast of like some, you know, this double class of Marvels, of the glamorous, okay Marvels and the persecuted mutants. And the little girl mutant kind of.
It's interesting how, I mean, not that they weren't used as social commentary when these comics originated, but like, it's really interesting to put it in the context of somebody within that social commentary. Of just like, this is what Marvel was putting out at the time. Like,
yeah, this was
just
Marvel,
like,
right.
Here's Captain America, and then they're like, and also the mutants are hated and just, you know, and feared, you know, kind of thing. It's interesting.
Yeah, and the little girl storyline is kind of tragic because at the end she just disappears. You don't know if she made it. She just disappears, and that was really sad.
I find that interesting as well. And I wanted to ask you guys about this. Do you think so? That little girl, he runs home at the end of the issue because there's like people hunting mutants.
Well, there's
sentinels.
Sentinels are introduced.
He's well since learned that there's a mutant like in his basement. So he's freaking. He thinks he's gonna come home and his house is gonna be burned to the ground, and his family might be alive or not. He's freaking out. Not also for the little girl, but not so much. I think really more for the safety of his own family. And then basically when he gets home, like they're fine, but it's a note from the little girl that's like, hey, I left, blah, blah, blah. And we don't know, quote unquote, what happened to her. But my question is, do you think that's what the cover is? And that's what happened to her? Or do you think that's just like, this is a pretty picture and I'm Alex Ross and I'm going to paint this kind of thing?
I choose to believe that the X-Men found her, but yeah, they leave it very,
the cover of this issue is like Angel carrying her away from a crowd of like people like throwing bricks and holding.
But within the issue, we're never.
No, within the issue, you don't know. But that's what I'm saying. Like, I wonder if that like specific cover was chosen because they didn't want to put that into the story, but they wanted like somehow you to know that maybe she was okay.
She's not, yeah.
But from Phil's perspective, he never knows, and I think that's a better ending to the issue.
The note that Maggie, so the mutant's name is Maggie, and the note she leaves is like, I almost cried reading it because she basically says, "I'm running away because if I stay here, your family will be hurt."
Yeah,
so
which they would have been because. Like this issue, they introduced Sentinels, which the panel of the Sentinels flying over.
Oh, it's terrifying. I mean, it's like dystopian future.
Yeah.
Fascist.
What's crazy is like it's not
imagery.
The Sentinels flying overhead isn't what caused like the riot. Like the riot happened because like on TV, Xavier was like debating Trask or something like that, and he introduced the Sentinels, and they started to grab Xavier, and then like one of the Sentinels was like, "I don't listen to you, human," and they just blasted Trask. So it was like one of those signatures like, oh shit, is this? And like, so like then riots happen and like the panels of like what happens after that is insane. Like there's just like people dead in the streets. And it has nothing to do with you're a mutant or not. It's just fucking riots.
There are no mutants. The Sentinel, which was created to kill mutants, kills a human, causes people to get angry at mutant. But again, like as a teenager, this didn't make sense to me. But as an adult,
it makes complete sense.
It's horrifying. And it's all very evocative of actual. If you'll notice, and this is we're talking about race, which is a touchy subject. So if that triggers anyone, I apologize. But in the kind of riot scene, you'll notice the dead body that Alex Ross draws is a black.
It's clearly
which is very intentionally, harking back to race riots in the 60s. And that's what would happen was something on the news would happen, right, to trigger racial sensibilities, and then just riots start and stuff gets blown up and minorities are killed.
Yeah, and in this moment, Phil's like taking pictures instead of like really being in the moment, so to speak. And then he finds somebody that's trapped and he's like, oh my God, what am I doing? Like, I need to help this person, But it's the Sentinels flying overhead, which I think is interesting. They don't feel protected by it; they feel exposed. Like they suddenly feel like, oh, there's bright lights on me shining down from these Sentinels flying overhead. Like I got to stop burning this store down and looting, that kind of thing. Like, and then that's when Phil's like, oh, fuck my family, and he like runs home, kind of. Thing.
And that's also intentional. I think is this idea that. No, not even humans find any real comfort in Sentinels. I mean, they're horrifying hunting machines, and they don't. They don't make anybody feel safe or better. I mean, you just get out of the way, and they're terrifying. And but so Maggie gets and again, and the cover is Angel saving the girl. Can we really assume that happened? Who knows? I
don't know. Really know. The conversation he has with his oldest daughter at the end is. I mean, it's not a short conversation. She just says, "Is Maggie going to be all right?" And he's just like, "I don't know. I don't have an answer for you. Like this is like it's horrifying, but I can't tell you."
Yeah, and also
yes or no.
The other thing too, the point I wanted to make about Phil's journey in this issue is at no point in this issue does Phil have an epiphany of, "Oh, I've got to save that little girl."
Yeah, I know.
Mutants
Like,
are
I mean,
humans
like
too.
once I got home,
Throughout the whole issue, Phil is still ambivalent and unsure. How should I view mutants?
I think he's still unsure about how he should feel about not just mutants, but the heroes in general, the Marvels in general. Like, I think part of him is still trying to figure out like what he's going through or how he should be. But I was telling you guys before this started, but I was like, this made me identify with Phil most of all, because like if I was in that same situation, I would have done exactly what he was doing and would have run home to make sure my family was okay, specifically my children. But then I was like, but the difference is I would have been like, okay, you're safe, I'm gonna run out and find Maggie now. Like, versus like, you know, it would have been like, okay, you guys are good. Now I'm going to go protect that little girl that I was just harboring and make sure she's not lying in a gutter, you know, kind of thing. Like, because that's what I would have done.
Yeah, but not Phil. He's fine with just his kids.
Yeah.
Well, I want to give him a little bit of credit here, because he goes from being part of a mob attacking the X-Men. There's a little mutant girl in his basement. His primary concern is his family, but he does... He says to Doris, he's like, my God, she's just a little girl. Like, he finally sees her as a person and not as a mutant. And I think he's just scared. He was just part of another riot. There's giant sentinels flying through the sky. How is he going to find this little girl? You know, all of his neighbors.
Well, okay, I don't expect Phil to go out and look for the girl, but the main point I wanted to make is just that we don't get a clear character journey where by the end of this issue, Phil is okay with mutants. I just mean he's still sort of ambivalent and working through it.
I think he's changed in some way, though.
I mean, he's definitely soft. He is softer towards them.
Well, and it's like, I think one of the interesting things too is going back to what Cyclops said about how they're not worth it, because he does find the X-Men and he's about to try to reach out to them, to help Maggie, but I think he also wants to get Maggie out of his house because her being there is endangering his daughters.
But then he doesn't, because he remembers. He remembers Cyclops' words and is afraid.
And it's like, if he had just been like, hey, I was a piece of shit and I am that guy that fucking threw a brick at you, but now I've got this going on. I need y'all's help. That would have been different, but he backed off of that because he was afraid of that.
He was so ashamed. So I think
another strategy,
ashamed as well. Yeah,
another strategy is just if Cyclops had said, "Hey, did you throw a brick at us?" He could have just said, "No, that was someone else."
No, that was another guy with an eye patch.
That was another guy with glasses, a mustache, and an eye patch. These aren't identifying marks. Did you see my tattoos? Shit.
But it's at the end of this issue when he's having that tough conversation with his daughter about we don't know what happened to Maggie. That's the TV in the background is blasting. Iron Man fights the Titanium
Clash of the
Man,
Titans, the Battle of the Behemoths, the Invincible Iron Man takes on the Soviet Union's terrifying Titanium Man.
In full color television, Sunday night.
It's like the narrator from Legend of Korra is how you read it. Back to Al's point, the juxtaposition of how the Avengers and Fantastic Four are treated by the public versus the mutants is 180 degree difference.
Right. And it's illustrated very well in both the writing and the art, I think.
Yep. All right, let's go on to issue. First of all, I love the cover of issue 3 is the Silver Surfer coming at you, and you see the Human Torch reflected on. Also, pretty good ab definition on the Silver Surfer. Oh, one more thing I wanted to mention on issue 2. They mention the Human Torch, who at this point is not John Hammond or whatever his name is anymore, but it's Johnny Storm.
Johnny Storm. Yeah.
They mention him having a teenage girlfriend.
Johnny was a teenager.
I don't like that.
You don't like two teenagers dating?
Why?
Johnny's
let's
a kid.
not.
He's a kid.
Let's just not have the Human Torch dated teenage. Let's just wait till let's have legal adults date legal adults. How about that?
They're both kids.
I think the bigger question is why did Reed Richards bring a 16-year-old with him on the space mission?
That
is an excellent question. Why is Johnny on that 4-man team going into space? I don't know.
I don't know. Why does he never heal his friend Ben and keep him as a monster?
He needs him on the team.
For decades. He keeps the thing a thing for decades. And there's no way. Reed's son, Franklin, is God. There's no way they couldn't just make Ben human again. at this point.
Yeah,
but
I
they
don't
just
understand.
don't.
Like, why don't they just like? Why doesn't Franklin just like snap his fingers and like make no more mutants? Wait, that's bad. Why doesn't he just snap his fingers and
Well,
go
he has
like,
Wanda for
"Hey,
that.
thing, now you can transform into a rock guy if you want to be a superhero still, and the rest of
Exactly.
the time you're a human. You're a normal human guy, just like Human Torch, who isn't always on fire and burning
Well, there
people
was.
around him."
Do y'all remember that there was that '70s cartoon where a guy had
Yes.
rings and he would do
Yeah.
clobber in time and become the Thing? They could do that for Ben. Give him 2 rings that he can connect and become the Thing.
Just
that was the
ban
most
fantasy.
random. It's like a Hanna-Barbera cartoon.
Yeah, but it was a teenage boy who would connect his rings and become the Thing. Like, do that, right?
Yeah. Or literally, and just give him the ability to change at will.
No, but
Like
my
Human
favorite,
Torch.
I know.
Does Johnny have to yell "Flame on"?
Yeah, I think he probably canonically does have to.
Is it like is that like the equivalent of a spell then? Is he casting a spell?
I think it's just psychology. Like him saying "Flame on" is a way for him to visualize and enact the change.
Okay. Does he say
also?
it every time?
But also, the teenage
Certainly
girls
not.
love it. They love that catchphrase. Like teenage girls love "Flame on," so that's fine.
Flame on.
I mean, teenage girls love it when Chris Evans says it. I think
he did look good as the Human Torch.
Why? Okay,
he's also not a teenager.
Okay, come out. Chris Evans is not a teenager, so let's not talk about him getting teenage girls happy.
Okay?
That's true.
Joe,
I mean, whatevs.
Let's not do that.
I'm just saying.
Let's edit all of this. But back to the thing. One last comment about the thing I wanted to make is if you all ever saw Josh Trank's just
I saw it. Yeah,
earlier in the film. I think the thing has an actual like literal line in it where he says like every moment I live is pain or something. And
does he? God, I don't remember that movie.
And Reed still doesn't help him. He's still just like, be a rock thing. But I think he basically says like every moment is pain for me. It was.
I mean, not only is there Reed, there's also Franklin, as Al mentioned, who his power is. Like Scarlet Witch can do whatever. And then there's also is her name Valeria? The daughter?
Yeah. I don't really know. What are her powers? I don't really know much about her.
She's just insanely smart. Like she's smarter than Reed. Like she's
not.
So
she's
not a like fucking.
There's zero.
There's so many resources
between Doctor Strange and Reed Richards, his actual friends, that he wouldn't. Like they couldn't figure something out with mixing magic and science.
And again, the thing has been the thing for 70 years.
Even before, I was going to say, even well before Franklin
7 decades,
let alone after.
If you all ever saw Venture Brothers, they do the best version of Fantastic Four. They have Stephen Colbert voices the Reed Richards guy.
Reed Richards, Stephen Colbert.
But basically, he makes his family into freaks. I forgot, but like he makes them live in a space station that he.
It's the best. It's exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah,
it's like
but
how
he turns
how
his
crazy
family,
Reed would actually be to not help his friend.
Yeah, and he turns them into freaks through his experiments, and basically just makes them stay that way to be public heroes. It's fucked up, but.
Also, I only put this picture up because it's like Avengers Day, and I loved it because it's the same. It's the same image as when Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver and Hawkeye joined the Avengers in like the previous issue, I think, and Cap's with them, like introducing them as the team because that's an actual comic moment that happens. But in Avengers Day, it's just a Captain America cardboard cutout.
I didn't even realize
he doesn't have time to be there with them. And I don't know why I found that so fucking hilarious, but I was like, that's the best image.
It's Avengers
also,
Day.
Tony Stark is clearly Timothy Dalton, like, right?
Yeah. Also, in the Avengers Day is Scarlet Witch, who, as we've discussed many times, should not be an Avenger. She should be dead or in prison
at this point in time
for all of eternity.
She's done nothing wrong.
She was never fine. She was never fine. She's caused multiple crossover events. She is a menace.
She hasn't done anything right now.
She's a menace.
She's perfectly fine.
All right, issue 3, Galactus. Galactus comes to town. Issue 3. First of all, Galactus is much small. He's a much smaller man than I thought he'd be. He's just as tall as a skyscraper, basically.
Not even.
Yeah.
He's like 6 stories tall.
Yeah, I thought Galactus was just a much larger man than he is.
No, he's not that big. Like, I think, I mean, he's obviously gotten bigger in the more modern comics, I think. Like, he is more like the size of a skyscraper, you know, in modern comics, I think. But like in the classic, like original Galactus comes to town, like comic, like he's just, you know, he's drawn exactly how he is in this book, like kind of, you know, I don't know, 7-8 stories tall, 6 stories tall.
Yeah, he's standing on top of the Daily Bugle or whatever skyscraper that is, and just kind of is on there. It's,
the Baxter Building.
Is it the? Yeah, I guess it is.
I love. So Phil goes to the zoo with his family in this issue, and his wife is annoyed because he's kind of like distracted and not paying attention. And she's like, you said you would take a day off and hang out with your daughters, you know, like kind of thing. So while this is happening, the Avengers are fighting somebody that's flooding something. But there's a guy that's shouting like, "This is Judgment Day. It's the signs of the apocalypse. There's going to be 2 more, and then it's the end of the world." And he's wrong because this water, the flood, has nothing to do with Galactus coming. But I really love that the flood happened, and then like 2 actual, like the sky was on fire and there was rocks in the sky, and so those were the other 2 events, so to speak. And I just love how, like, even though he's wrong, he's also kind of right because like the flood is the first of the 3 events before Galactus shows up. Just love that little aside.
Yeah, and we get, again, going back to the original comic event. You know, before Galactus arrives, of course, Silver Surfer, who's his herald, comes to town. Yeah. And he and Johnny Storm have a fight. This was even in the Fantastic Four 2 Rise of the Silver Surfer movie. Not Josh Trank Fantastic Four, but the
Rise
the Chris Evans, Michael Chiklis, Jessica Alba.
God, Michael Chiklis.
I forgot who played.
I haven't heard that name in a while.
I don't remember Reed Richards' name.
Ian Gruff. I think it's Ian Gruff.
He's easily the most forgettable of all 4 of the actors.
But so even in that movie, Johnny Storm and Silver Surfer have kind of a little showdown. But so Silver Surfer, of course, arrives, and then he heralds Galactus, who's about 5 stories tall. He's just a tall man. He's a very tall man.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about this issue is at the beginning is kind of the tide is turning against public opinion on superheroes. Public is more critical of them. And this is the first world obliterating event that could happen in a Fantastic
Tony
Four.
Stark's in like, I don't know, the tabloids and or falling out of like favor with the public. And then like, I guess they're not liking the new Avengers aside from Cap, which is why he wasn't there at that press conference. You know, just little stuff like that. I mean, I think, and also Spider-Man's on the rise. So it's like Spider-Man's a menace. And like, you've got the Daily Bugle, like shouting about how superheroes are pieces of shit. I think this is the turning point for Phil in terms of like, one, he buries himself in his work more than ever, but then at the same time, by the end of this, he realizes like through the cosmic event of like Galactus coming, that he's like, oh fuck, my priorities are way out of whack, and I'm a horrible person, and I need to be a better father.
Well, I think father
and husband.
I think it also mirrors the state of comic publishing, because this is the kind of tail end of the Silver Age into the 70s, 80s, and again, it's not just the Fantastic Four and the Avengers. This is the age where you have Avengers West, Avengers Northeast and Southwest. You have 30 different rosters, and you have the Fantastic Four and all this just surplus of heroes. And I think Phil and the public's kind of growing indifference to the Marvels reflects this kind of publishing state of just there's a lot going on. There's a lot more happening. And people are less interested in a thing that's kind of trite and they've seen before. Until, of course, Galactus, because that's a galaxy level event is new, sort of. We haven't seen that before. And that kind of recaptures public attention. So again, I like how this, on a meta scale, sort of recaptures what was happening in the publishing scape, because they lost a little bit of readership and interest, and then here's a galactic threat. Let's up the scale. Let's up the stakes to get people interested again in Marvels.
I was just going to say I loved how it ends, because they stopped Galactus, and for like 2 days, everyone's very thankful. Mm-hmm. And Phil's monologue is saying, you would have expected us to canonize the Fantastic Four, to raise statues in their honor, name bridges and mountains after them, invite them to dinner at the White House. At least I would have expected it. Silly me. And it cuts to a panel of the Daily Bugle that just says, publisher calls Galactus a hoax. And it's like, again, that is what would fucking happen.
It's totally, it's very real to life. Yeah. This
well, he even pointed out like Jay Jonah's the only one to have done that, like demonizing per se, but like, or like hoaxing it all kind of thing. But like the rest of the publicity was around this was vague at best and not proclaiming them as heroes. It was just like, this happened.
But I think it just goes back to that kind of celebrity culture and this jaded public and, you know, looking for flaws, and they're over it. And that's how we just...
I think it also goes back to what Phil was dealing with from issue 1 about how like the average human doesn't want to feel like they are reliant on superheroes until they are reliant on superheroes. And then they need them.
As soon as the event pass, they're like,
right. They're back to
normal. Yeah.
Oh, that wasn't even a big deal. Galactus wasn't even a big deal. Like we would have survived.
Well, he wasn't. He was only about 6 stories tall. He really wasn't as big a deal. I do want to make an art note, because this page right here with Galactus kind of crouching there, I can't really explain it logically, but it's very Astro City. This is just a super Astro City construct that we're seeing here.
I love the idea of Galactus getting knocked over, but then not smashing into buildings and stopping himself before he, because it just like to touch the ground would make him less godlike, you know. Like he's just like, oh yeah,
and he just
I stand up in midair. Yeah,
and the Thing helped out. He broke a pipe, so you know he helped out.
He did.
He broke a pipe. It's an important pipe for his machine.
I just feel bad for the Thing. Everyone else has like amazing powers, and he's just a rock man.
It is
really strong, stretchy guy. Come on, amazing powers.
Well, so I guess only Sue and Johnny. I guess Sue and Johnny have pretty amazing powers, and everyone else's.
Well, Reed's also like his superpower is that he's